So today I'm going to talk about how to troubleshoot desktop computer motherboard and power supply with focus on how to make troubleshooting motherboard and CPU a little bit easier. And first, when you have problem with the system rebooting or shutting off shortly after you start the system, for example, you turn on the system and after 5 seconds it freezes and shuts off. And you turn on the computer, Windows boots up, shuts off completely, or shuts off before you even get to the BIOS, the post. And the first thing you want to check is the power supply, and there is a device like this that tests the power supply, and it's very handy to have something like this so you can make sure that the power supply is outputting the correct voltage. Otherwise, with too many components to troubleshoot, you never can really determine which one is causing the problem. So with this one connected to the ATX power connector on the power supply, I just have to plug it in, and now you can see the fan spinning. And you can see on the power supply tester, all the lights are on except -5 volt, and that is normal for most power supplies. What you do want to have is the plus 3.3, plus minus 12 volt, and at least the two plus 5 volt LEDs on. And the -5 is not necessary, it's not essential. So now you can see the power supply is functional. I can unplug this. And now here we have a motherboard, the Gigabyte AMD Athlon motherboard, and here's an Athlon processor, 2600. And to test the board, you don't necessarily have to put into the case, because if you have to swap board very often or swap CPU or do whatever you have to do, it can be burdensome to mount and dismount the board every time. So the best way to do it, if you have to work with the board often, is to just keep it on a non-conductive surface such as wood or the porcelain floor. You don't want it to be touching some metal surface like the case of the computer, because otherwise it will short out the parts on the bottom, all these metal connectors on the bottom. And what you can do is plug the power supply onto the connector, and even without the power switch, there is a trick to turn on the computer. So here I have the ATX power connectors connected to the motherboard, and I didn't mount the CPU fan because I'm just using this for demonstration purpose. So anyway, to power on the computer, usually you have a power switch. But what happens if you don't have a power switch? Now let's take a closer look at the jumpers where the power switch and other panel cables connect. For example, here you have the speaker, you have the power switch, the reset, and various other LED that connects to the case. And these are just basically jumpers. So when you're pressing this power switch, it effectively shorts the jumper. So when you press the power switch, you close the circuit, allows electricity to run through, and the silicon controlled rectifier, SRC, kickstarts the rest of the components. And so to turn this on without a power switch, you just need to plug in the cable into the power supply, and now identify the jumper that controls the power on and off, which should be these two here. And you can use any metal object, just short it like this, effectively creating a power switch effect. And there you go. The fan is spinning the power supply. And unfortunately, this motherboard has a little bit of problem that when you power on the motherboard, it shuts off shortly. I think the motherboard and the CPU are both bad because I've already tested this with other components. But in any case, you can see this result by just using the power supply and the motherboard, and then use your screwdriver or another metal object to turn it on and check what could be a possible problem with the system. So there goes the easy way to troubleshoot motherboard and CPU, and I hope you will save some time by using this method.